we'll explore what it takes to Zeitgeist-Proof DEI within your organization, discussing on how to build objective, measurable strategies that can stand firm in tough times and realize true business impact. Now, before we get into that, we're sending a big hello out to our audience today, our registered Zoom participants, and all of our friends streaming across our social platforms. We're happy to have you here. Let us know where you're joining in from in the comments section. We always love to see. And just as a quick reminder, if you are in Zoom, make sure that you select everyone or all panelists and attendees so that we can actually see your comments. So where are you guys joining in from? I'm going to check the chat real fast. New York, Denver, the UK, Texas, Vancouver, all over the map, as always. For our regulars, it's great to have you back. For those of you that are new to your Brain at Work Live, welcome to the party. For some context, it is the title of one of the best-selling books by our CEO and co-founder, Dr. David Rock, and it's also the name of our blog and podcast. We are recording today's session, so if you're interested in a replay, be on the lookout for an email later today. That email is going to include a survey, actually our final survey for the season, and a number of other resources aligned to today's conversation. And please put your phones away, close out of your emails, give yourself an hour to actually process and digest what you're going to be seeing. We're really excited for this conversation, so get settled in. But before we do, I'm going to share our speakers for today. So, a long history of driving change and building culture in large, complex organizations has given her deep expertise around DEI practices and principles, especially in the area of communications. In fact, she broke barriers as one of the first, and for a long time only, Black C-level speechwriters in the Fortune 100. Her 3 TED presentations challenging businesses to get serious about inclusion have collectively over 2.5 million views. Her superpower, applying neuroscience to solve DEI challenges, build actionable DEI frameworks and strategies, and brokering honest DEI conversations among top leaders. Please join me in welcoming NLI's Global Head of DEI, Janet M. Stovall. Janet, it's so great to have you here today.
It's great to be here. I'm excited. Thanks, Shelby.
You're welcome. And our moderator for today, an Aussie-turned New Yorker who coined the term neuroleadership when he co-founded NLI over 2 decades ago. With a professional doctorate, 4 successful books under his name, and a multitude of bylines ranging from the Harvard Business Review to the New York Times and many more, a warm welcome for the co-founder and CEO of the Neuroleadership Institute, Dr. David Rock. David, it's great to have you back as always, and I am passing it over to you.
Thank you, Shelby. Thanks so much for your warm welcome and everything you do for us. And speaking of which, Janet, so great to be with you here. And, you know, sometimes people interview me and I'm excited to interview you.
That'll be fun.
It's firstly, thank you for everything that you've done for us in the last 2.5 years. You now, for a while, been heading up our whole DEI practice, which involves developing our thought leadership and solutions and consulting and just, you know, the impact we have in the world. And I also know that you're passionate about our internal DEI practices as well. Give attention to both. So thank you for everything you do. You know, I've always had tremendous respect for your brain and passion and approach. And, you know, we always argue wonderfully about all sorts of things. They're almost always right. In fact, I'd struggle to think of a time I was, but I seem to just argue with you anyway. But it's great to have you here. And, you know, you're out talking to a lot of chief diversity officers all the time as part of your role, like, you know, every week, many. What's the, you know, what is the zeitgeist out there at the moment? What are you hearing? What are you sensing from people out there?
Well, it kind of is a continuum. CDOs are concerned because this moment feels a little bit different in a lot of ways because so much progress happened, apparently, in 2020 for all the wrong reasons. After the murder of George Floyd, there was a huge upsurge in understanding and commitment to DEI within organizations. And, you know, those of us who've been in this space for a while were really excited to see that change. And then the weird thing was, this is 2020, by the end of 2020, a lot of that was being walked back. And it felt concerning. It felt bad. The reality is if you look over time, that's the way it always is. Progress goes forward, and then there's a backlash. That's just the way things are because people don't like change for whatever reason. So even though it feels a little scary right now because some of the really big issues have changed legally. And as what happens in the United States tends to happen everywhere else, it kind of reverberates. It feels different. But the reality is change is cyclical. Progress goes forward and it goes backwards. And I firmly believe that this is not a great retreat, but more like a great reset. And I think a lot of CDOs are starting to feel that now too. But it's a little scary time for most of us.
Right. Is that expression 2 steps forward, 1 step back? Must be common expression because it's part of life a lot, isn't it? And it's most systems don't go like this in their growth. They go like this and then this, as they're growing, all kinds of systems. So
exactly. And when you think about DEI, the way I always say it is, in a world of inequity, equity itself is disruption. So we have to understand that we are always in the business of disruption, and disruption is never easy for those who feel disrupted, for those who are doing the disruption. And it's hard. And it's why CDOs burn out so much. They really do.
Interesting. Yeah, so you're reminding me of a couple of areas of research. One is just, loss is more painful than gain, right? So, you win $100, it's
right.
Quite, rewarding in the brain, but you lose $100, it's much more painful. And what's happening is there's all these wins and that was great, but then there's these losses and it feels much bigger than those wins were. And that's just a function of the brain in many ways. And then I also, there's, also uncertainty is really activating. Like when you can't predict what's going to happen, you tend to anchor on the worst.
Right.
It's sort of a natural, it's a pretty adaptive reaction in some ways, right? If you know something's good, you can relax, say it's going to be good. If you know something's bad, you can plan. If you don't know something's good or bad, your brain goes kind of back and forward. It's unsettling, and it actually gets more attention like that. So I think the uncertainty itself is really debilitating, and I hopefully we'll address as much as we can some elements to bring maybe not more certainty, but maybe some clarity to the issues. And I loved some of the data that you put together for the topic today. We'll dig into that. And then I'm also thinking about, the sort of reaction and the swings and roundabouts we've been on. And, certainly there is an issue that like losing power or losing status or, is very activating, whether that's in an exercise in the lab with a banal activity, or, in the real world where there's, real implications that, people react really strongly to feeling like their status could drop. And I think that's a reaction that kind of we've always seen possible and tried to build a different approach from the beginning. But we're starting to see some of that in the world as well. So anyway.
Absolutely.
Some quick reflections. So we wanted to dig into 3 topics, and folks, put your comments in the chat, your questions in the chat. We'll sort of look at the questions maybe after each chapter. We've got kind of 3 chapters. The first one is this sort of, and I'm going to sort of address the elephant in the room questions, right? The first one is, can an organization and excuse the colloquial, but stay woke and not go broke, right? Can organizations actually invest in and commit to and take a position on DEI and not, face a backlash that's debilitating? What do we know about that from the data? What's your perspective on this? What do we know from the data? And maybe we can talk about the science as well. Over to you.
It scares the heck out of organizations. And I think it's because of the fact, because the answer is yes, an organization can. And quite honestly, if you're looking just at the data, most organizations are, but we see a few that are outliers, and it scares all of us because the huge backlash that we're getting now, and social media exacerbates this problem. Of course, you start something and it's like an avalanche, but organizations, especially leaders who are not in the DEI space, who don't understand the cyclical nature, who don't really see what's happening within their own organizations or hear the stories about, you never hear the stories about the ones who are surviving. You only hear about the ones who get in trouble. And, thinking about Budweiser, the big beer distributor, they did something in their advertising and there was a huge backlash and they lost a lot of money. And so people see that gets highlighted. They think we can't do this. Or recently there was a situation where a bunch of people who believed firmly in some of the things that were happening legally sent letters to a group of CEOs and said, your woke policies have to go. That's terrifying for a CEO. because they're not in this work all the time. They don't understand that 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. They're looking at what their boards are saying to them, what some employees may be saying, what the press is saying. But the reality is a lot of companies are staying woke and they're absolutely not going broke. And we don't hear about those.
Right.
Nike's doing well, Carhartt's doing well, United Airlines is doing well. There are a lot of success stories, and they're doing it. So yes, they can, but it's not an easy time for people who are not in the space all the time.
Right. Even the NFL is doing well, right? And they were really
Exactly.
stand up, in this space. Yeah, it's interesting. We really remember the outlier. It's a function of what we have called a safety bias, right? A safety bias is we pay a lot of attention to dangers. They really kind of stay salient in the brain, and we often mistake actual dangers for perceived dangers. So there's a bit of a safety bias. You hear one story and you assume that's going to be all of us. It's a bit like there's millions of people in the ocean every day, and half a dozen people get have a shark attack, right? And like, I don't know the exact number, but there's way more people die falling out of bed every year than shark attacks. It's about a factor of 100 to 1, right? But we don't get terrified getting out of bed. It's about 700 people die every year falling out of bed, literally, in America. It's a fact.
When we know our beds, we don't know sharks. I mean, sharks I'm not friends with. That's the same thing with DEI. I think as a CEO, you understand the balance sheet, you understand how your organization runs, you know how things are. But DEI, maybe you don't understand. So that's the shark. Right. And then when you see, the sharks circling and you see them circling Budweiser, you kind of go, you know what, maybe we should be concerned. And it's scary when people are sending you letters saying, you're problematic, you're woke, we're coming for you. That's terrifying. So it's understandable. Like I said, if you're in this work all the time, you see the cycle. If you're not, it is terrifying.
Yeah. It reminds me of the whole issue when the previous administration was first elected, right, in the first term. And there were literally Black Lives Matters folks lined up against, MAGA red hat people, and literally lines in a factory and yelling at each other. And the CEOs were like, this is like, we can't get anything done. And so there were some literal senses of that, but there were many companies where that was happening kind of psychologically. And we wrote a piece, and I was thinking deeply at the time about kind of, what do you do as a leader? Do you come out for one side or not? And I think it's a difficult situation. Saying nothing is a statement. It's kind of tacit approval. In this situation, from my perspective, I think you have to come out and say something. You have to come out and take a position. But at the same time, that before you even do that, the most important thing is like aligning people around the shared goals of your organization. Like, the most important thing is, if you run an organization, you're there to get a certain mission done. Now, whether that's saving lives or cleaning floors, you're there to keep a promise, right? To execute on a mission. And I think the first job of the CEO, and even all the way down to the team leader, is bring everyone together around shared goals. There's an attempt to divide us all, right? Bring us together as much as we can. And then, my personal opinion is, I think that, standing up for DEI, and you might say I have skin in this game, but it's how I've always felt. It's not a new thing. I've always believed this, but I think standing up for the benefits of both diversity and inclusion, and speaking up, all that, I think is a really important thing to do in this time. And we're seeing a lot of organizations doing that, and the vast majority of them are seeing a positive uptick in their business, as far as the data that I can see.
And I'm a firm believer that this is going to get solved most likely in the business arena. I said that in my TED Talk. I said, I believe business is uniquely positioned to move the needle on diversity, equity, and inclusion, to move the needle on equity. Because diversity business the world is more diverse now. It's just changing. Inclusion is a decision that an organization and its people can make, but equity is much bigger because that's systemic. But in order to move that needle on systemic equity, I believe of all the entities that exist in the world, whether it is governments or churches or neighborhoods or whatever. I think business is best positioned to do that for exactly the reason that you said, because I don't care what you think around your dinner table. I don't care what you think at your homeowners association meeting or what you think in the front pew of your church. When you come to work, there is a shared goal there, and you can either like it or not. If you don't like it, you can leave. And I think that that is a true value of CEOs, to be able to say, listen, when we come to this place, we have a shared goal, and whatever that goal is. And I believe you should be honest about it. There are some organizations that have a very different perspective on what their vision is, what they believe, and they're very honest about that. And it may be a more conservative approach, but fine. The CEO is the person who says, this is who we are. And you either want to be there or you don't. And if you do want to be there, then you're all driving to the mission. What I believe is that because the diversity happens for all the right reasons in most organizations, when you have people who might not otherwise be working together towards something, you're clear about that goal. I think it does change things, because that forces them, whether they like it or not, it gives them a superordinate goal, and it forces them to work towards something. So I believe business is most able to do that more than any place else.
Yeah, they have the ability, the resources, and businesses together can do a lot. Let's go to the sort of bigger question, I think, on everyone's mind, or certainly I'm hearing this a lot, which is, what happens to the programs that are out there now that SCOTUS has struck down affirmative action? What happens to the sort of programs now? Which ones should we be thinking about reducing? Which ones should we be increasing? What are your thoughts as an expert in this space? What are you thinking?
That's another one of those things that has scared the mess out of people and out of organizations, because it is frightening. It seems, it was one of those things I was mentioned, that we thought some of this stuff had already been resolved and now it comes back. But the reality is, within the general workplace, that decision is not a problem immediately. Where it's a problem is that the pipeline of diverse talent is going to be affected at the end of the day. There was a university in California that did away with affirmative action, and their diverse population dropped. So it's going to happen. The university system, the colleges are going to have to figure it out, because those are the people who come in. But within organizations themselves, affirmative action is not really an issue. When affirmative action, it was a part of the civil rights movement in the United States of '64, there were never quotas or anything like that. Was never part of it. That was never part of the discussion. And then back in '78, Bakke versus University of California, I believe it was, they outlawed quotas in higher education. So the idea that people hear affirmative action and think quotas, not at all. That's a dog whistle fear. The programs that will survive, Kenji Yoshino and David Glasgow, who lead the Metzer Center at NYU for law, have a very interesting way of looking at this. And I'm going to be on a panel with Kenji at our summit in October, so I'm looking forward to that. And I went to his presentation in NYU, and his position is that there are three types of programs within the DEI space in corporate America that are going to be fine. Programs that are about debiasing, programs that he calls ambience programs, namely those that address the workplace in general, and then programs that he calls universal, that are the kind that, rising tide lifts all ships. I love the fact that at NLI, we have solutions in all of those areas. But what we also do, we recently, in response to this, because we hear it from our clients, we hear that they're nervous, they're calling us and saying, what are we going to do? Can we use your solutions? I'm always happy to say, if you've got NLI, you're good, because, we didn't necessarily anticipate this, but the way we viewed it, I'm going to ask you a little bit about that in a minute, but the way we looked at DEI in the first place sort of shields you in this space. But we do now in our consulting team, we have a solution where we can come in and do exactly that. Look at your programs, and we can red light, yellow light, green light them. And if they're in the red light section, where it's like, this one might be something, if indeed this comes into corporate America, because right now that SCOTUS decision does not affect corporate America or business or nonprofits, it doesn't do any of that yet. But should it come over this way, because the Supreme Court said they're going to look at everything, and they may, then we can come in and tell you this program might be at risk. So let's get it moved over into the yellow zone by doing this, or let's get it in the green zone. And, although we're going to do what's right, I do think that we're fortunate, for our clients are fortunate, that our solutions, because of the way they're designed anyway, they're probably going to be okay. I can't anticipate anything that's going to happen that would make what we do. And so that being said, I came to NLI partially because I call myself a diversity pragmatist. I'm looking for the objectivity to deal with the subjectivity of DEI. And one of the reasons I came was because I looked at those solutions and I thought, this is about as objective as it comes. And that being said, you and I've had this discussion. Sometimes I want to push it a little bit further, and you've allowed that to happen. It happens, but we still keep it based on things that make it objective. So I've always wondered, what is it that made you design these DEI solutions that are so relevant for this time right now, before this time happened? Why did you do it that way?
I mean, the science was just so clear. I mean, I think there's probably two answers to this. One is the science is so clear. Like when you take something like bias mitigation, right? The way, when we researched bias mitigation, which was like a 4-year journey to research this, right? We realized it's so deeply embedded in the brain, and really, like, there is no kind of self-awareness that fixes it. Or like knowing all about bias doesn't fix it, right? What addresses it is you actually need each other. Oh, I think
you're back. You're back. I thought it was me.
We'll see if it happens again. I'll change platforms. Let me know by the chat maybe if it goes off. Yeah. So the research was so clear. Like with bias, it wasn't just that people had issues with other people of different races. That can happen. It's that deeply inbuilt in the brain is huge processes that are totally beneath conscious awareness. And, the way we made every decision was biased, right? And I was like, well, why don't we address bias in every decision, not just in like the hiring and promotion, because then, we're going to make better decisions. And then there's the additional bonus of that is that it won't be seen as a racially, like a solution that's addressing race directly, right? Now it actually ends up addressing it deeply, but it's not addressing it kind of head on. Now we've taken some flack for that. A bunch of people have said, well, we want something that addresses race, really, really head on. And we're like, well, you can do that, but we'd rather address bias on all decisions, right? Business decisions, people decisions across the board, because if you have a brain, you have bias, and this way we won't get the backlash as well. Now, similarly with inclusion, what we saw, and we did a big 3-year research project on inclusion, right? Inclusion in the brain. And what we saw, and this was really important, is that most inclusion strategies were built on kind of raising up certain audiences. And we realized that created more out-group, and that inclusion was about creating in-group. And what we saw from the research was that every effort of inclusion should be about creating in-group between people, which comes back to shared goals and shared experiences and understanding differences, respecting differences, but bringing people together. And so the overall strategy was inclusion is something everyone does with everyone, right? Rather than inclusion is for certain audiences. So inclusion's, and if you're not actively including, you're possibly accidentally excluding. So it's something that everyone's thoughtful about with everyone, right? And then Kenji's research comes along with, the covering research, and, he shows that just about the whole population, it feels like they're covering something, and is, so everyone can really benefit from it. So the science was a big piece of this, and it just said, look, it's just better to, we'll build habits better if we do bias this way and inclusion that way. And then I guess, I'm kind of a bit of an anomaly maybe, or just the way I'm kind of built is, I'm still a, straight white male, cis male that, grew up in a relatively middle class world, right? And so I can still see the world as someone from that, right? And I can imagine, a strategy and imagine how, people I know would feel, right? Now, separately, I'm personally really passionate about DEI and was for, my whole life. And, we can get into why, but it's something I was super passionate about. And we didn't start our DEI practice in the pandemic. We started about 7 years ago. And we did it because it was the area that was needing the most research, and was lacking real like momentum, despite having so much commitment. That's why we went into the space. It really, like, it was an area that needed some real science. And we spent about 4 years investing a fortune before we had anything whatsoever to sell or do commercially, because, we just wanted to see if there was something we could add. And so anyway, I think that we built this because, the science is just really clear and we follow the science. So that's our first principle: follow the science, experiment, follow the data. And secondly, I just felt intuitively that, the higher you go in an organization, the more you're dealing with cis straight white men. And so the last thing you want to do is alienate those people and have them feel that they're being attacked, right? So how do we find something that creates a toward state for them, like a reward, like a good thing for them, by participating in a bias program, for example? How do we have people excited about it rather than threatened about it? For me, that was kind of excuse the phrase, no-brainer. But how do we get those people excited about it, not anxious about it? And for me, if we got people anxious about the work we're going to do, we were just never going to get anywhere. So those are sorry, it's a long answer, but that's the thing.
That's exactly what I want to hear. And the thing is what I love now is because we have such an amazing research team at NLI who I can always go to them and say, okay, because like I said, when I first came here, my thought was, I love this, but what happens if somebody wants something a little bit more? What if they really want to push into the issues more deeply of decisions against, just not decisions, but decisions about people? Once again, we could go back to the science, and some of the new sciences, the new science on implicit bias now, implicit bias versus cognitive bias. And the way I make that distinction is implicit bias is what happens when you take cognitive bias and drop it into society and all the issues that go around it, and people start making decisions, become biased about people. Some of the new research that we discovered was saying that basically implicit bias is about not so much the cognitive bias that makes you automatically think something. Implicit bias is about automatic actions that in response to your unconscious thoughts. So what's unconscious in implicit bias is more the actions. So using that same scientific background, we were able to, we had a client ask, could you take us a little further? We built a workshop for them, and it has been very successful. We're going to go back and do some more work with them. But once again, even when you took it a little bit further, if you focused on the science and you focused on what science was saying now about this particular area of it, you could still create something that people could embrace, they didn't feel threatened by. And it was wonderful. I actually conducted that workshop with one of our senior consultants, and we were amazed at how people were very open, but I did not feel there was a threat state in that room at all. And we got a little bit deeper into some difficult, more tricky issues, but because we focused on the science and we understood, we came in knowing what the threat could be. And we said, we're going to lean into that understanding. We're going to build something that takes that into account. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It just means that we face that reality. Like, I'm a pragmatist, and I agree with you. People don't like change. This is a threat, puts people in a threat state. How do you do this work if people are threatened?
Yeah, I mean, one of the fundamental challenges with DEI work is putting aside the moral case, putting aside the just for a moment, we'll bring it back. We'll just put it in for a second. The moral case, the reaction that certain constituents have to DEI, to championing DEI, like putting all that aside, one of the fundamental challenges is that when you build a more diverse and inclusive team, you don't have a felt sense that your team is doing better. You actually have a felt sense that your team is performing worse.
Right.
And this is a really, really interesting phenomenon. We published a whole piece on this in HBR called Diverse Teams Feel Less Comfortable. That's why they perform better. You heard that right. Diverse teams feel less comfortable. That's why they perform better. My team can maybe put that one in the chat, but it's one of the fundamental challenges is not just that, people resist the idea or they they're fundamentally racist. You get a little bit of that, but it's that their felt sense is like, look, when I brought in different people, it just slowed everything down, and we were arguing all the time, and and we actually studied this whole phenomena. What's happening is people are working harder cognitively. They're doing a thing called cognitive elaboration, which is they're explaining themselves more clearly, they're challenging each other more, and there's a lack of what's called fluency as a result. And fluency is just the ease of which things flow, right? And so it feels more choppy, and what they don't know is that a month, 2 months, 3 months later, they've built a better solution. They've found problems they would have missed. They don't see what they're missing. They just had this, oh, that was harder, right? And so when I saw that, that really got me passionate about building the business case, the science case, all this stuff, because I finally understood why DEI wasn't bigger in the world, because it just doesn't feel like it's a good thing. Now there's really clear evidence that it is a good thing and that it doesn't feel like it. So I'm like, okay, well, let's bring the science in to actually make it better.
And what we say at NLI, we have a way we call conventional wisdom and practice versus research. And in the DEI space, conventional wisdom and practice say diversity is a problem to solve. Research says diversity solves problems. And that's exactly that difference you're talking about. It feels like it's not working, but it actually is, because you need that difference in order to see things differently and actually create new things.
Yeah. No, there's a couple of questions in the chat. If you want to have a look, we'll comment on some of the questions and comments in the chat. Then we'll get to chapter 3, which is kind of literally how do you zeitgeist-proof things going forward. We'll get into that. But, a couple of questions. One of them about sort of the groups that you feel are doing harm, and how do you really address those groups? It's a really tough one. The sort of automatic bias you have with that organizations have with that is, we need to build a mandatory kind of experience for those people. We need to bring these people into training. And we actually wrote a piece on this that I think it's called, and it was in Strategy and Business Magazine, it was called, Is Your Diversity Program Making Your Company More Biased? And basically, if you mandate a diversity program, what happens is the people who are probably going to be excited about it, sort of the supporters and the passionate advocates, right? Those people are slightly annoyed now because no one likes to be told what to do. And the people who were actually sort of the reason you mandate it, they get really annoyed. And if they were like slightly problematic before, now they're really problematic. And so you make the problem worse. And for the people that would have got benefits, you make it worse as well. So what you don't want to do is mandate something, required experience for everyone. And that's sort of the knee-jerk reaction. And we think of sort of the big middle, which is the people who are generally in support of DEI. And it's true, generally people are in support of DEI, well more than 50%. Then you've got the passionate advocates, that'll vary, but the people who are really staunchly fighting are a pretty small percentage. But I think it's really important to remember that about like even a really positive change, you get about 20 to 25% of people passionately advocating against it. It's just human nature as well. It's not even necessarily about DEI. People just don't like change.
They're contrary. Yeah, they don't want to change.
Yeah, and especially if they feel it's been forced on them, right? They get an autonomy issue, a status issue, maybe a fairness issue. So you as you're thinking about sort of those 3 groups and the people who are really, fighting it, you don't necessarily want to try to push those people. It's more of a pull strategy. Bring the 2/3 or the 90, 95% of people along further. And then those people have to come along or have to exit. That's how I would see it.
And I see that, to your point about the questions, there are 3 questions in the Q&A, and it's interesting. They're very different questions, but I think I can give you, and this is probably going to come up in our next topic that we tackle about the business case. But the one question was, I see many efforts oriented to gender balance and LGBTQ+, however, very few efforts on age, disability, culture, and origin. How can we advance on all fronts? That's question number 1. And then what quantitative metrics can we track to advance in all ERGs? That's question number 2. Then the other question is, appreciate the need to have a shared goal around DEI. Any insight into how to do this effectively with a global team with many country differences? And I have one answer to that. It is make DEI about the business case. And we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that. And I'll come back to I'll try to remember to come back to these to answer them that way. But that's the answer for all of this, because just that we talked about, David mentioned focusing on sort of this higher goal, the thing that we all have in common. Within an organization, you have business goals because it's a company, it's an organization. If it's a nonprofit, it still has a vision. There are three things that organizations exist to do, period. Make money, save money, achieve a vision. If you tie DEI to one of those three things, or to all of those three things in some way, then you do solve for what type of diversity issues you need to be focused on more. It may be gender, it may not be, it may be race. It depends on what you're trying to do. It gives you actual metrics because you have something that you can measure against. It's not sort of this fuzzy logic. And in a global organization, those goals, they may be different in different parts of the world, but you have a business goal. There's no way a business organization doesn't have some sort of a goal that they have to hit. If DEI is tied to that and not treated as something outside over here, or as David said, if you don't lean to the moral case, but you lean into the business case, you solve for all those things.
So let's dig into that. So we're in chapter 3 now. Let's talk about kind of how you Zeitgeist-Proof DEI. So the first thing is, and I really support this, is anchor on business case. And I love the way you crystallize this. You're making money, saving money, or achieving a mission. Those are 3 things you're doing. Pick one and anchor your, that makes sense for your organization, right? We did some research a few years back about all the different business case data that was out there, and this might be helpful for folks. We looked at kind of the 4 groups of studies. We found there was a grouping of all the studies. There's really hundreds and hundreds of studies, like the John Hardy put in the chat, some data. There's hundreds and hundreds of studies out there, but we found that basically in 4 categories. And one was, revenue, so either cost savings or increased sales, right? That's one. There's another one around innovation. There's a whole lot around innovation, right? There's a whole lot around your talent pool, right? You just got, if you're only hiring men, you're hiring half of the good people, right? So there's a talent pool, and then there's the go-to-market, the whole go-to-market thing. So being able to address, sell to those people, understand those people, different market segments. So, depending on your business, it could be 1 or 2 of those that are really, really relevant. So I think that's another healthy filter. And those 4, they're kind of 4 different benefits, but you can find literally 100 studies now in each of those categories, right? Revenue benefits, innovation benefits, talent pool benefits, and go-to-market benefits.
And to that point, David, one of the things is that, every year the big consulting firms come out with these wonderful stats, and they are very encouraging. Organizations that are more diverse are 35% more profitable. The challenge with most of those stats is that they are incredibly correlative. They say, this is a business that's profitable. The same business has high diversity. So ergo, diversity leads to profitability. Those of us who are in this DEI space, we do believe that. We get up every day to make that happen. What we have seen not enough of, I believe, are the actual causative studies. And that's why in LI, we are launching a research study. We are shaping it now, where we want to ask organizations that choose to be involved in this to let us come in and help you align a business goal directly with a diversity goal, tie them together. And we want to measure, and we want to see, how does that diversity goal help you achieve that business goal? And I believe if it happens the way I think it's going to happen, I realize I could be surprised. I don't expect to be, but should I be with the results, that's okay. At least I'll know. But I don't believe I'll be surprised. I think we will prove those correlative studies to be true. And if we do, we will be one of the few organizations out there that actually has a causative proof of the value of DEI. Because I go back to being a DEI pragmatist. I go back to looking for the objective and the subjective. Part of what's going to make DEI Zeitgeist-Proof is if we stop talking about it as the right thing to do and show that it is the profitable, smart thing to do. We say it, but we have not yet proved that. And so I think we are in a position, because we have clients who are willing to do this with us, who let us come in and do it. I think we're in a position to prove in this research study that we can do that.
You just reminded me of something I wanted to mention earlier, but somehow it's a minute 40 before I got there. You've been running a fantastic masterclass for internal DEI practitioners in organizations. And I know there's another one coming up. Maybe my team can put a link in there, but that's a few months with other DEI practitioners to really dig into all of this, to dig into the science. It's a fantastic program. We built it because we were actually publishing so much in the DEI space that I feel that we needed to organize it, like for ourselves, even for me. Like I wanted to be able to see what we'd done, how it all fit together, and we just published so much in this space. So it's a 3-month program. People can dig in and understand the whole space. But if you're interested in that, sorry, Janet, just folks can, if you're interested in that, just put masterclass in the chat. Someone will follow up with you as the sort of fastest way if you want to. And it's by application. We're specifically looking for fairly senior and somewhat seasoned DEI practitioners in organizations. But yeah, Janet, sorry, back to you.
No. I was saying what's very different about it, what I've enjoyed about it, because I've facilitated it up to, I've been the one who's been doing it with another one of our members of our consulting team. What I think is very different about it is, once again, it takes an objective approach. It says, and we have the science to prove why this works, but what we say to practitioners is, you have to find a way to get other people to understand what it is you're trying to do. And you can have a passion for DEI. You don't do this work unless you have a passion, because it's hard work. I mean, it's really hard work. It can be discouraging sometimes. It's great when it's great, but it's really bad when it's bad. And that's why CDOs now have a tenure of about 18 months. That's about, it used to be 3 years, we're down to about 18 months. And 66% of these chief diversity officers in the Fortune 500 who were in place in 2020 are now no longer doing that work.
66% in 2020.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and some of it is, and part of it is because people look at DEI as this sort of fuzzy thing that's out there. It's feel good, it's warm, it's right, it's hug each other. That is not what it is in the business space. That is not what it should be. It is a business asset with business value. And so one of the things we do in the masterclass that I think is different, I haven't seen it anywhere else, is we ask our practitioners to come in with a problem, an honest, not a DEI problem, a business problem. And sometimes you have to go find that, because if you're very buried in the DEI space, you're doing your work here, you're not paying attention over there. We say, come in with a business problem. And for 12 weeks, we take you through how to objectively look at that problem, figure out how DEI is going to help you solve it. And not just that, communicate that value to people who don't feel the same way about DEI as you do. People have their own self-interest. That's business. Business needs people to have different self-interest. You can't just go in and say, my self-interest is DEI, so you should care. No, that might not be your self-interest. How do I make you care about DEI because it satisfies your self-interest?
Yeah,
and we know that's the way the brain works. And so that is why our class is a little bit different, and we've evolved it to that. And it's fun because we are much better at it now. But in the very beginning, the shock to me was it took me 6 weeks to even get people, to DEI professionals, to shake themselves out of our passion for it, to say, no, I need you to see what that person's passion is, because that's the way you have to tell the story. And it's been great for me. I'm learning a lot I'm teaching it and learning at the same time, which is great.
Oh, that's all of us. It's a good sign when that happens, right? Thank you for sharing that data. We're all shocked, including me. I hadn't seen that. That's amazing and really telling. I'm thinking about the business case, and this is a time to build business case and to do it really directly, and shifting away from the ethical and moral case. But I also think, and we did some thinking on this a few years ago, I also think there's another case to really anchor on, which is kind of, it's like going a click deeper into the business case to explain the business case, kind of opening the black box. And particularly because, as I said, leaders don't have this felt sense that DEI makes things better, right? Mm-hmm. So we sort of, alongside the business case, I think we've got to explain like why that occurs and how that actually occurs. And I think one of the fundamental challenges is there are sort of two groups of people in the world, particularly when it comes to leaders, right? There are leaders who are very focused, goal-focused, right? Have incredible belief in their decision-making, incredible belief in their visioning. Maybe they've been very successful through their whole career, right? And they listen to people here and there, but they fundamentally are very, in control of the decisions and the process and their company's vision, right? There's a bunch of leaders out there, very, very much like that still. Then there are other leaders who have at some point had a quiet moment where they realize that their brain is pretty random a lot of the time. And that they often make some really, really dumb decisions by accident while feeling really confident. Sometimes when I meet a CEO, I'll say, have you ever had a decision you were really, really confident in? And then a few months later, you look back and you went, what was I thinking? Right. And I'll ask this, and if a CEO says, nope, I know we've got no chance in hell. And if they say, yeah, it's like, okay, now we can have a conversation, right? So there are people who just realize that they're seeing a slice of things, that slice has huge bias, and that other perspectives are often not just important to yours, but often just completely different to yours and better. And that the more you have those different perspectives, the smarter your organization will be. And so I think, to those first people, it's tough, right? Those first people who just think that they're brilliant and other people's ideas are always like, it's tough. Those people often are highly intelligent. You think of Bill Gates, right? And Jeff Bezos, a bunch of people are highly intelligent, definitely some of the smartest people in any rooms, right? But you can still be that intelligent and realize that you really, really need other really broad perspectives to really, really challenge you. And so I think for those people, it's difficult, but for the people who are sort of open and you've got that crack, I think it's important to explain like the real mechanisms of how greater diversity and inclusion and equity, how that actually drives those business results. And we've done a lot of work on that. We dig into it in the masterclass, but I think it's really helpful to get and actually explain the mechanisms. And I explain one with like cognitive elaboration, but there's a whole bunch of mechanisms that happen because we have that diversity that needs the inclusion as well. People need to feel that they actually can speak up.
Absolutely. And you talk about bias. We have the SEEDS model that categorizes different types of bias. My favorite one in DEI is experience bias. And when you say that to people, they don't really understand it. They go, oh, I'm biased because I've done it before. There's another nuance to that, which is I'm biased because what I believe to be true, I believe it to be objectively true because I believe it. It's sort of there was a dress that broke the internet a few years ago where some people saw blue, some people saw white. If you saw blue, nobody could convince you that dress was white. And I don't care what they told you, you couldn't, because you can only see that. We go through life and we build our concepts subjectively of what reality is. The way we're raised, nature versus nurture, experience, all those things, that's our reality. We believe these things to be true. They may not be objectively true. And so you have a bias toward that. And unless you are open to somebody telling you, no, the dress might be blue. I know you see white, but the dress is blue. Unless you're open to saying maybe it is, you'll never see blue. So that's what diversity does, I think, at a cognitive level. If you're willing, you have to be willing to listen and hear and understand and respect that there is a objectivity, that there's a subjectivity to what you believe to be absolutely true.
Yeah, it's called an experience bias. It's one of the biases in our SEEDS model. Maybe my team can put the article on that in Strategy and Business. SEEDS continues to be a super powerful, useful tool for like seeing bias in processes and seeing bias in conversations. Doesn't help you see much bias in yourself. Nothing really does that. But you can see bias as it's happening in a conversation. And as it exists in a process, and call it out. It's been an incredibly useful tool. It's now being used by millions and millions of people, which is really awesome. But I think that experience bias of believing that you have all the information, you have all the answers is part of the issue. Whereas when you realize that you've got a slice of it, and that you really need those other people, you're much more open. You're much more open. We've got about 5 minutes left, Janet. What else? What else? And I want to make an announcement while you think about my question as well, just to get it out of the way. But my question is sort of what else can people do to Zeitgeist-Proof, their strategy? But just the one quick announcement before you do. Our summit is coming up. She mentioned Kenji Yoshino. He's one of my favorite researchers in the world. He's amazing, happens to know deeply about all the legal side. So one of the keynotes of our summit is Janet and Kenji, and actually the Chief Diversity Officer of Microsoft joining us, and some others. We're going to have an incredible session on kind of what's next for DEI. The 4th and 5th of October coming up is our summit. We're doing the craziest thing this year. We're doing an in-person event for people from inside organizations. It's limited to that. The downtown Manhattan's going to be an incredible in-person experience, and a hybrid, a fully virtual experience in parallel. So streaming that, but we'll have people from all around the world at this conference. So we're doing an in-person and a virtual summit all at the same time, which we're absolutely terrified to try. But we love innovating around the summit. We're excited to be back somewhat in person. So this topic, we're going to dig in a lot more into this topic with even more clarity and kind of tools. It's at the end of day 1 on the 4th. So, you know, get yourself there. If you don't even know if you can get yourself there, try to hold the time in your calendar so you can at least be watching virtually. And I think the team's just put it. Anyway, so Janet, a few more minutes. What can people do to Zeitgeist-proof their DEI aside from really anchor very carefully on business case and mechanisms? What else comes up for you?
Point of view of the DEI practice at MLI is that we have a system for behavior change, a model for behavior change called priorities, habits, systems. If you take that and map it onto DEI, my advice and what we use as our point of view and the way we do our work is that diversity, prioritized organizationally, leveraged through inclusive habits, and sustained with systemic equity, solves business problems and improves business outcomes, organizational, because it's not just businesses. I believe that's the case. If you prioritize diversity organizationally, if you then leverage it with inclusive habits, because that has some intention involved in it. You have to change behavior. Forget about changing hearts and minds, change behavior. Hearts and minds will follow or not, but the behavior will change. So leveraging with inclusive habits, and then fixing the systems. At the end of the day, what sustains an organization, what survives individual belief or value of diversity or DEI is systems. If the systems have bias points in them, and if you don't ferret that out, fix it, then you can't sustain it. So that is our point of view. And I believe that any organization that does those 3 things that way will survive anything. Whatever SCOTUS has up its sleeve next, whatever cycle comes back in, an organization can survive and grow and tap into the real value that diversity brings.
Right. So thinking systemically, priorities, habits, and systems, really getting in there. At the summit, you'll hear a bunch of case studies of organizations who've been applying this in lots of different ways. You're going to hear about a third of the summit is actually on DEI, about another third on performance and talent, about another third on culture and leadership, but DEI is going to definitely be a feature in there. Janet, thank you so much for the rich conversation. I learned a ton, as I always do. You know, it's an area I've always been passionate about since, you know, I actually remember, you know, I look like I'm an in-group, like I'm in the dominant, you know, kind of person in the world. But, you know, growing up, I went to a religious school. I wasn't of that religion. I was, you know, grew up Jewish, was in the minority. I was picked on. Everyone else, the school I went to seemed richer, you know, in part of an in-group. And I actually felt a lot of exclusion. And it was physically painful. I walked the route to school again, and a few years ago, I was like feeling the pain again. So somehow, you know, I look like I'm, you know, in the, you know, inclusive, you know, in group, but I actually grew up really feeling excluded and seeing what that can do to people. So I guess from there, I've always been passionate about inclusion and, you know, and all of that. But it's been wonderful to work with you. And, you know, my passion is following the science, experimenting, following the data, and just thank you for everything you're doing to keep pushing the science and, you know, building the masterclass and building the thought leadership. So I'm going to hand back to Shelby here, so you've all got time to get back to the next thing. Thanks very much, everyone, for being here, and hope to see you all at Summit. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David and Janet. That was such an incredible conversation. Just a few more announcements while we wrap up. Thank you for being here again. As always, we can't have these conversations without you. We have a poll that'll be coming up in a few minutes. It's specifically for our specifically for our senior executives. If you enjoy your Brain at Work Live, we think you'll really love our Insider Exchange group. It is a great place to have roundtable discussions and learn more internally from our team. So if you're interested in that, check out the link to apply. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, obviously check out our podcast show, Your Brain at Work Live, wherever you stream your podcast. We have a ton of great conversations on there. We update weekly, so stay tuned for more. And as they mentioned before multiple times, Summit is live. We're so excited. We have ticket sales going. So if you are interested in joining us in person or hybrid, check out summit.neuroleadership.com. And this is where we officially say farewell. So on behalf of our team behind the scenes and everyone, we thank you for being here again. And this is the closing week. So we're taking a break for a few weeks. We'll be back in mid-September. Enjoy the rest of your summer. Have a great break, and we will see you soon.